A 13-year-old black boy, often lost in thought during class, suddenly hears his name echo through the room. His teacher calls him out, snapping him back to reality. In an instant, he's on his feet, facing a math equation so complex it's far beyond his grade level. The room shifts, some classmates chuckle, others whisper in doubt, their eyes filled with skepticism. But what no one realizes, not even the teacher herself, is that standing before them is a hidden math prodigy, a genius yet to be revealed. The midday sun streams through the tall windows, casting golden streaks across the polished floors of Riverside Middle School. It's early autumn in Atlanta, Georgia, and the air is thick with the quiet hum of students settling into their afternoon classes. The faint screech of chairs scraping against linoleum, the soft murmurs of half-hearted conversations. Room 3002 is no exception. A mix of anticipation and adolescent energy fills the space as eighth graders shuffle to their seats for math class. Near the window, at the very back of the room, sits Jamal Carter. A quiet, observant 13-year-old black boy, he has a way of blending into the background. His deep brown eyes, sharp yet distant, wander toward the outside world as he drops his notebook onto the desk. His posture is relaxed, almost too much so, one arm lazily draped over the table, the other supporting his chin as if he's on the verge of drifting into another world. Beyond the window, trees sway lazily in the crisp autumn breeze, and a small bird hops along the rusted fence, pecking at invisible crumbs. Jamal's gaze lingers on the serene scene, utterly captivated, as if the secrets of the universe lie just beyond the glass. But make no mistake, Jamal isn't distracted because he doesn't care. Quite the opposite. His mind works at lightning speed, far ahead of the slow, methodical pace of the classroom lessons. Numbers and equations aren't just schoolwork to him. They are a world of endless fascination. Yet, the repetitive drills, the sluggish explanations, the way problems are broken down step by step, it all feels painfully uninspiring. So, rather than engage, he lets his mind drift, seeking excitement elsewhere. His notebook, though appearing blank on the assigned pages, tells a different story. The margins are filled with intricate calculations, complex formulas, and advanced equations, puzzles he's challenged himself to solve in secret. At the front of the class, Mrs. Amanda Thompson stands with her arms crossed, her gaze sweeping over the room like a hawk. A seasoned educator, she's known for her sharp tongue, unwavering discipline, and sky-high expectations. Everything about her, from her crisp blazer to her perfectly styled hair, exudes authority. She prides herself on identifying potential in her students, pushing them beyond their limits.
And today?
Today, she is not pleased. On her desk, a neat stack of freshly graded math tests sits like a weight pressing down on her patience. The results? Disappointing. A few students performed decently, but the majority struggled.
Badly.
Mrs. Thompson does not tolerate mediocrity. With a sigh, she picks up the stack and begins calling names, returning the tests with brief, clipped comments. Decent work, she mutters to some. You need to study more, she tells others. Her tone is firm, direct, leaving no room for excuses. Then, she reaches Jamal's desk. For a split second, she hesitates. His test sits right on top of the pile, and in bold red ink, a perfect 100% is circled at the top. Not a single mistake. It's not the first time Jamal has aced a test, but what frustrates Mrs. Thompson isn't his ability, it's his attitude. He never participates, never raises his hand, never engages. With a tight-lipped expression, she places the paper on his desk without a word, turning away before he can react. All right, listen up. Her voice slices through the chatter, snapping the students to attention. Instantly, the room falls silent. She leans against her desk, eyes scanning the room with laser focus. Most of you did, okay, she says, though the unimpressed edge in her voice suggests otherwise. But a lot of you are still struggling with concepts we've been covering for weeks. Jamal barely listens. His chin rests on his hand, his eyes drifting back to the window, where the soft rustling of leaves seems far more interesting than the lecture unfolding in front of him. But Mrs. Thompson notices. Oh, she notices. And that flicker of irritation in her eyes? It's growing stronger by the second. This is basic algebra, she continues, her voice rising just a bit. If you don't understand this now, how do you expect to succeed? High school, college, real life, these skills matter. Her words land heavily on the class, but her gaze? It lingers on Jamal. Something about his disinterest, his nonchalance, gnaws at her. And at that moment, she makes a decision. Jamal Carter, she calls out, her tone firm, expectant. The sound of his name pulls him from his thoughts. Blinking, he slowly turns his head, the weight of every pair of eyes in the classroom suddenly pressing down on him. Mrs. Thompson gestures toward the board, where a challenging equation now stares back at the class. A problem far beyond their current lessons. A problem meant to prove a point. Come solve this, she says, watching him closely. A ripple of whispers spreads through the room. Some students snicker. Others exchange doubtful glances.
Jamal?
He simply stands, his expression unreadable. Slowly, he walks to the front of the class, the murmurs of disbelief growing louder behind him. They expect him to fail. They expect hesitation, uncertainty, embarrassment. But what they don't know is that Jamal isn't just any student. He's a genius. And in the next few moments, he's about to prove it. Moved faster now, the once daunting equation unraveling like a puzzle he'd solved 100 times before. Every stroke of the marker brought clarity, each number and symbol falling neatly into place. The classroom, once filled with skeptical murmurs and muffled laughter, had fallen eerily silent. Mrs. Thompson, still standing with arms crossed, narrowed her eyes slightly, her sharp gaze fixed on the board. She had expected hesitation, maybe even failure. But what she saw instead was something entirely different: confidence, precision, a mind working at a level far beyond his peers. Jamal, lost in the rhythm of his own thoughts, hardly noticed the shift in the room. The equation no longer felt like a challenge, it was just another problem waiting to be solved. And he knew exactly how to do it. The final number appeared beneath his marker, the solution standing bold and undeniable at the bottom of the board. He paused, exhaled, and set the marker down with a quiet click against the tray. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, "Wait, what?" someone blurted out from the back. "Hold up, is that right?" Another voice chimed in, disbelief laced in their tone. Mrs. Thompson, her expression unreadable, stepped forward. She studied the board, eyes scanning every line of work, searching for even the smallest mistake. The silence stretched as the class held their breath, waiting for her verdict. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she turned back to face Jamal. "Correct," she said, her voice even but laced with something unexpected: respect. A wave of shock rippled through the class. A few students exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of amazement and confusion.
Jamal?
The quiet kid who barely paid attention? He had solved it? And not just solved it, he had done it flawlessly. Jamal, still calm, simply nodded. He wasn't looking for praise or validation. He had known the answer the moment he had seen the problem. This was just confirmation of what he had always known. Math wasn't something to fear. It was something to conquer. As he turned to head back to his seat, the weight of the moment settled over him. The way his classmates looked at him had changed. No longer just the kid who stared out the window. Now, they saw him for what he truly was: a prodigy. Mrs. Thompson, watching him return to his desk, allowed a small smile to flicker across her lips. Maybe, just maybe, today had been more than just a lesson in algebra. Search. Reason. This moment. He had never expected to be the center of attention, let alone receive applause for something that had always felt so natural to him. Numbers had always made sense, more sense than people, more sense than words. But now, for the first time, his gift was something more than just a quiet talent scribbled in the margins of his notebook. It was something seen, something recognized. Mrs. Thompson let her words settle before continuing, her sharp gaze sweeping across the room. "Some of you might have struggled with this problem," she said, "but struggle isn't failure. Struggle is part of learning. The difference is how you approach it. Jamal didn't panic. He didn't guess. He broke it down, step by step, until the answer was clear. Jamal swallowed, shifting slightly in his seat. The weight of everyone's eyes still pressed on him, but it wasn't the same kind of pressure as before. It wasn't doubt. It wasn't mockery. It was something different, something heavier but not unpleasant. A boy from the middle row leaned toward his friend. "I thought he was just zoning out all the time," he whispered. "Did you see how fast he did that?" "He didn't even use a calculator," another girl murmured, shaking her head in disbelief. Mrs. Thompson turned back to Jamal, her expression softer now, less stern. "You say you didn't think anyone noticed," she repeated his words from earlier. "Well, they've noticed now." A few quiet chuckles rippled through the class, but they weren't cruel. They weren't mocking. They were impressed. Jamal glanced back at the whiteboard, still covered in his neat handwriting. The equation that had once been a challenge now looked simple, almost too simple. He let out a slow breath, the realization settling in. Maybe Mrs. Thompson was right. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. Jamal's journey had not only changed the way his classmates saw him, but it had also shifted something within Mrs. Thompson. She had always prided herself on being a firm but fair teacher, yet Jamal's quiet genius had reminded her of something deeper, the importance of looking beyond what was visible, of recognizing the potential in students who didn't always raise their hands or seek attention. From that day forward, she made an effort to engage more with the quiet ones, the overlooked ones, the students who, like Jamal, might have been hiding something extraordinary beneath the surface. And in doing so, she realized that teaching wasn't just about equations and lessons, it was about seeing people for who they truly were. One evening, as Jamal sat at the kitchen table, deep in thought over a particularly tricky problem for his advanced math class, his mother walked in. She didn't say anything at first, just watched him with quiet admiration. Then, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder, she finally spoke. "I'm so proud of you, Jamal," she said, her voice warm with emotion. "You've always been special, but now the world is starting to see it too." Jamal looked up at her, the corners of his lips twitching into a small but genuine smile. "Thanks, Mom," he murmured, his fingers tightening slightly around his pencil. He glanced back down at his notebook, the familiar lines of numbers and variables stretching before him. But something was different now. For the first time, he wasn't just solving a problem for himself, he was solving it for something bigger. A future. A purpose. A path he was no longer afraid to walk. As he carefully wrote the next line of his solution, a quiet certainty settled over him. He didn't know exactly where this road would lead, but he knew one thing for sure. He was ready to follow it, one equation, one challenge, one step at a time. And in that moment, the boy who had once hidden his brilliance finally knew he was ready to shine. Sparkles, if this story inspired you, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on more powerful and heartfelt stories. Let's keep sharing meaningful lessons together. Rock it!